All praises to the Most High, Yahweh Bashem, Yahweh Shai, Bashem Rachakwadash. Double honors to the elder apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone who rule well. Peace and salutations to the hopeful elect, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth, laboring in His truth in all sincerity. Jeremiah 51:7 in the NLT. Babylon has been a gold cup in Yahweh's hands, a cup that made the whole earth drunk. The nations drank Babylon's wine, and it drove them all mad. America just turned 249 years old this past July 4th. The average age of an empire upon collapse is 250 years. America, also known as Mystery Babylon or Babylon the Great, will not be an exception. And just doing a quick online search, there seem to be 7 signs of a nation's impending doom. 1. Economic decline. 2. Social and cultural decay. 3. Political instability and corruption. 4. Military overextension. 5. Environmental issues. 6. Demographic shifts. 7. External threats. So, Abba Yahweh willing, I'm going to do a 7-part series on these 7 symptoms of Babylon the Great's impending doom in the same order I just listed. So, part 1, economic decline. Some of the attributes of economic decline are excess spending, trade deficits. Whenever a country is importing more goods than it exports, outsourcing jobs and replacing workers with AI, which leads to unemployment, hyperinflation, which is caused by the dollar losing its value. The more the Federal Reserve Bank prints money, the more value the money goes down. The government has to pay this money back with interest, and this is done by overtaxing the citizens. So it's not necessarily that the prices are going up. It's more so that the value of the dollar is going down. And now it takes more of those dollars to buy the same products that were cheaper 5, 10, 15, or 20 years ago. In my last video, I spoke briefly about the so-called almighty dollar. This phrase was coined by an individual named Washington Irving. The almighty dollar, which is a pagan god, is in direct opposition to the Heavenly Father Yahweh, the one and only true Almighty. So if we look at Exodus 6:2 and 3, it states, And Elohim spake unto Moses, and said unto him, I am Yahweh, and I appeared unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob by the name of Power Almighty, but by my name Yahweh was I not known to them. So we see that there is only one true Almighty. So that this term, that the almighty dollar, I'm going to attempt to show how that is indeed a pagan god in itself. So let's go back to Washington Irving that I mentioned earlier. And I have an article here from November 12th, 2023 by someone by the name of Robert Deese. And it reads, the word Almighty used in connection with God appears 57 times in the King James Version of the Bible. Starting in the book of Genesis, God is variously referred to as the Almighty God, God Almighty, and most often simply as the Almighty. The English idiom, the almighty dollar, which is commonly used to mock the worship of wealth and money, does not come from the Bible. It was coined in 1836 by the American author Washington Irving, whose best known works include the short stories The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle. There is an earlier similar term. In 1616, the English playwright and poet Ben Jonson used the term almighty gold in his poem Epistle to Elizabeth, Countess of Rutland. And just on a quick side note, 1836, the phrase coined That's in reference is the almighty dollar. In 1616, it was the almighty gold by someone named Ben Jonson. And this could very well be the same exact spirit, just back in the reincarnation. And we understand that Ecclesiastes 1:9 says nothing is new under the sun. Paraphrased, Ecclesiastes 3:15 says that which hath been is now, and that which is to be hath already been. Ecclesiastes 6:10 paraphrased, that which hath been is already named, and it is known that it is man. So that's just a quick side note about the similarities of the almighty dollar, the almighty gold. So back to the article. But the more familiar almighty dollar first appeared in a travel story. Irving wrote about a steamboat trip he took through the Louisiana bayous. The story, titled The Creole Village, was originally published in the November 12th, 1836 issue of Knickerbocker magazine. Irving was impressed by the laid-back lifestyle of the Creole people who lived in Louisiana's bayou, and by how unconcerned they seemed, at least to him, about making or having money. He wrote in his travel piece, "The inhabitants, moreover, have none of that eagerness for gain and rage for improvement which keep our people continually on the move. In a word, the almighty dollar, that great object of universal devotion throughout our land, seems to have no genuine devotees in these peculiar villages. And unless some of its missionaries penetrate there and erect banking houses and other pious shrines, there is no knowing how long the inhabitants may remain in their present state of contented poverty." So just alone in this very first paragraph here, Washington Irving is acknowledging that the people in these particular villages, the Creole people, who are Jakes, by the way, he's acknowledging that they have no use or no care for any kind of paper money or currency that is trying to be established in this country. Whatever their currency system is, or them trying to implement a form of capitalism in this country, the inhabitants of the land have no care for it. They have no use for it. So he states that there is no knowing how long the inhabitants may remain in their present state of contented poverty. They were content. Even though he described it as poverty, the people there were content. They probably had some type of barter system set up where they traded resources amongst themselves. You had maybe on one particular plot of land, someone is growing watermelons. On another plot of land, someone is growing oranges. Just to use a few examples here. On another plot of land, someone is growing yams. You're down in the bayou region. So yes, you do have a lot of swamps, but there's also freshwater bodies such as rivers, lakes, creeks, streams, where there's more than enough fishing. You're down in the south, so there's probably chicken houses all over the place. So these people had no use for Esau Edom's money and their capitalist system that they were trying to establish, which is why he would go on to say, they have to start establishing and erecting banking houses and other pious shrines, having to send missionaries in there so that the people would leave their current state of being content. Of course, Edom thinks that seeing them this way, they say that that's poverty or they're being uncivilized. So knowing how long the inhabitants may remain in their present state of contented poverty, this is once again Esau Edom feeling the need to civilize those who they think are inferior to them. But near the end of that same piece, Irving opined, "As we swept away from the shore, I cast back a wistful eye upon the moss-grown roofs and ancient elms of the village, and prayed that the inhabitants might long retain their happy ignorance, their absence of all enterprise and improvement, their respect for the fiddle, and their contempt for the almighty dollar. So Washington Irving is acknowledging that the people actually had contempt for the dollar. He's actually acknowledging that he's actually praying that they remain that way in their happy ignorance, their absence of all enterprise and improvement, their respect for the fiddle, and their contempt for the almighty dollar. So, the actual author, these are his words now. I suspect this romantic vision overestimated how content the locals were to being poor. Of course, in 1855, when the Creole village was included in a collection of stories called Wolford's Roost, Irving made it clear that he had meant no offense to the almighty dollar, that is. In a satirical footnote in that book, later included in the larger Irving anthologies like the Crayon Miscellany, Irving wrote, "This phrase, the almighty dollar, used for the first time in this sketch, has since passed into current circulation and by some has been questioned as the savoring of irreverence. The author therefore owes it to his orthodoxy to declare that no irreverence was intended, even to the dollar itself, which he is aware is daily becoming more and more of an object of worship." So Irving, even though this is a satirical piece, is acknowledging that the dollar itself is becoming an object of worship, and relating it to what he stated earlier about how the Creole people of that particular village, they had no use for it. They were happy without it. So just to scroll back up here a little bit, I'm going to click on this Creole people hyperlink. And they actually do show these people. We know that these are Jakes indeed. And you can see the paintings that they've used here. Clearly a Jake. Clearly a Jake woman. Another Jake woman. Now that looks like someone probably of Spanish or French descent, with the hidden hand right there, so we know what he's all about. But just to show that these were Jakes and the Creole people, regions with significant populations, obviously Louisiana, Mississippi, California, Texas, Mexico. So there probably was trade routes here, you know. We probably had a lot of Reuben down here, a lot of Gad. There probably was, even though Judah was on plantations at this point, there probably was some Judites roaming around with their freedom papers. You know, Levi definitely was down there. Benjamin probably already had trade routes into this area, as well as Issachar, which is why we see, of course, right here, regions with significant populations, Mexico, and we do know that a lot of Jakes fled into Mexico when things were getting really bad for them, which is probably why, or which is why, there's a significant population of people of Creole descent in Mexico today. So we'll go back to this particular article, scroll back down to the ending itself, and reread. And this is still part of his satirical post. The author therefore owes it to his orthodoxy to declare that no irreverence was intended, even to the dollar itself, which he is aware is daily becoming more and more an object of worship. And there is a lot of truth in jest. So with capitalism becoming the culture of a developing country, the dollar eventually starts getting exalted and starts to corrupt. And this is why, by Washington Irving's own admission, the Creole people in that region had no care for money. But when you look at modern day Jakes, they're all on a paper chase. Anything to get that dollar, because we understand that this money now that's being exalted, it eventually starts to corrupt. So let's look at what Yahushua says in Matthew 6:24. This is Hamashiach Yahushai speaking here, and he states, "No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve Elohim and Mammon." And let's also take a look at 1 Timothy 6 and 10. "For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and have pierced themselves through with many sorrows." So prior to these heathens coming here and setting up a government and a system of capitalism, Jake had very little need for a currency system. They had a barter system of resource trading amongst themselves. But we do understand that Esau, Edom, perverts and destroys everything. Hebrews 12 and 16. "Lest there be any fornicator or profane person as Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright." And in their perversion of everything, they've taken even the eagle. The eagle itself was always a symbol of strength or youthfulness. But in this particular country, in this capitalist system, the eagle is now a mascot of capitalistic greed, which is why you can see it on the back of a quarter. You can see it on the back of a dollar. You know, it's become a mascot, so to speak, of capitalistic greed. So let's go into Isaiah 40 and 31 and talking about the eagle. "But they that wait upon Yahweh Bashem Yahushai shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint." And let's also take a look at Psalms 103 and 5. "Who satisfieth thy mouth with good things, so that thy youth is renewed like the eagles." So as we can see, the eagle itself is a symbol of renewed strength and youthfulness. But U.S. capitalism associates the eagle with payday. I remember when I was younger, I used to hear older men say all the time, "The eagle flies today," whenever it was payday. So in this country, everyone is in pursuit of the almighty dollar. They advertise it. They advertise this country as the land of opportunity, the roads being paved with gold. You can make it here if you just work hard. The American dream. We'll even give you free government assistance. But it's all a snare. It's a trap. Your reliance on the so-called almighty dollar will eventually lead you to the digital ID and ultimately the micro C-hip. Your reliance and participation in this capitalist system, which revolves around the now depreciating dollar, will lead you to accepting their new world order, because you'll be afraid that you'll be locked out of it. You'll feel like everything you've worked for and all your hard work will be in vain because you won't have access to your money. You would rather cleave to the almighty dollar, which by at this point here, when there's a digital ID and then eventually a micro C-hip, eventually it will be no dollar. But you're still cleaving to the so-called almighty dollar as opposed to cleaving to Yahweh Bashem and Yahushai. The so-called almighty dollar, along with this beast system, is run by the elite. And these are the devices of men. And the scriptures tell us not to trust in the devices of men, but instead to trust in Yahweh Bashem Yahushai himself. So we can see that in Psalms 118, verse 8. "It is better to trust in Yahweh Bashem Yahushai than to put confidence in man." And we also see that in Jeremiah 17, verse 5. Jeremiah 17 and 5 states, Thus saith Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai, cursed be the man that trusteth in man, and maketh flesh his arm, and whose heart departeth from Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai. And that almighty dollar in itself, pursuing it, is a curse. As stated earlier, Washington Irving was in amazement at how the tribes had no use for money. And this was in 1836. That's 60 years after the official birth of this nation in 1776. So depending on what your assessment is of a generation, we're looking at two to three generations after the official birth of this country in 1776. Jake was still content with not getting involved, at least in that particular area, that Bayou region. Creole people they didn't care about money at this point. They were living off the fat of the land. They had everything that they needed. So you compare that now and contrast that now to how the tribes are. And that's because they've started, eventually going after that money. They're going after that almighty dollar, which is eventually going to lead to their destruction, because they're going to be forced or feel compelled to eventually wanting to remain and participate in this beast system. They'll eventually accept that digital ID, which is going to lead ultimately to the micro chip. So going back to what I was mentioning earlier about the eagle symbolizing renewed strength and youthfulness, and to seeing how Esau Edom has perverted it, we can look at Obadiah 1 and 4 to see what comes out of that. And we know that Obadiah 1 and 4, this is a prophecy about Edom that states, though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. So this nation has used the dollar, which is represented with an eagle on the back of it, to fund so-called space missions, military funding for its fighter jets, all types of NASA projects with dreams of colonizing Mars and stuff like that as the new frontier. But Obadiah 1 and 4 clearly says, though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai is not to be mocked. And recently, we've seen Nero speaking about the BRICS nations being set up to undermine the US dollar. All of that's been already prophesied. All of that's already been mentioned. And I'll end it here in this particular video with Jeremiah 51 and 53. Jeremiah 51 and 53 states, though Babylon should mount up to heaven, and though she should fortify the height of her strength, yet from me shall spoilers come, those BRIC nations, which are led by Russia and China. Yet from me shall spoilers come unto her, saith Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. And I'll read that again to end it. Jeremiah 51 and 53, though Babylon should mount up to heaven, and though she should fortify the height of her strength, yet from me shall spoilers come unto her, saith Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai. I pray this video was edifying and reaches the ears it's supposed to reach. Shalom.